The Vice President of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, for joining us for this opening. And a little later, we'll have the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico. I'd also like to thank the UK government for supporting the forum, Ambassador Sharrock, as well as our knowledge partners with whom we're deeply engaged in the fight against corruption. The OECD's Business and Industry Advisory Council, BIAC, the U4 Anti-Corruption Resource Center, the Alliance for Integrity, the German Development Agency, GIZ, Business for Social Responsibility, the International Anti-Corruption Academy, Transparency International, and other very important participating partners. Thank you to all for having joined this effort and making it such a big success. The presence here of so many leading organizations, policymakers, and experts shows the strength of our shared commitment to fight corruption and promote a culture of integrity. We've said it many times, in many ways, corruption destroys human progress. It corrodes the foundations of our societies, our economies, our well-being. It feeds inequalities. It distorts markets. It finances wars and terrorism. It helps smuggle people, guns, drugs, diverting public and private funds into illicit activities. It is a threat to development, to the environment, to human dignity, to global security, and to public trust. In fact, a little earlier this morning, I opened up a meeting of the Deauville Partnership, which is a G7 initiative now under Italian presidency, about the countries in transition in the MENA region, the so-called Arab Spring. And each of them asked us for certain types of support, you know, such as education. I was saying to the Vice President, help us with education and anti-corruption. Help us with SMEs and anti-corruption. Help us with health and anti-corruption. Help us with the question of how to get the private sector, a better business climate and anti-corruption. And of course, anti-corruption is part of every single one of these other initiatives because corruption erodes or corrodes all of them. So, recent corruption scandals in the private and public sector have contributed strongly to the erosion of public trust in business, government, in public institutions, in the media. More broadly, corruption and its impunity confirms the perception that globalization is working for only a few, while it is leaving the many behind. Edelman Trust Barometer for 2017 revealed that only 10% of the people feel that the system is working for them. 69% of those surveyed expressed concerns about corruption, and 62% about globalization. And exclusive nationalisms grow. This is creating a series of dangerous synergies that can lead to international fragmentation and confrontation. We need to reverse these trends. We need to restore the trust of citizens in their governments, in our democracies, and in the ability of global integration to improve lives for the better. Combating corruption effectively is essential to advancing in this direction. And this is why our joint efforts are so important. As many of you know, the OECD has been at the leading edge of anti-corruption efforts now for many, many years. Our policy tools are helping countries tackle corruption in all its forms. Thanks to the OECD's Anti-Bribery Convention, foreign bribery is now illegal in 41 economies, and soon Costa Rica, Lithuania, and Peru will raise the number to 44. Those are the adherents to the Anti-Bribery Convention. Now, I have to say, you may be surprised. You say, well, one would have thought that it was illegal, period. No. Not long ago, it was tax deductible. This is not a joke. So it's a tragedy. You could deduct expenses that you used to bribe third parties in other countries in order to get business. Now we've gotten rid of that, but also now there's specific legislation to make it illegal in all these countries that have or will be joining the Anti-Bribery Convention. Our standards for business are complemented by the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises and the revised G20 OECD principles of corporate governance. So altogether, the convention and the guidelines and the principles, they provide globally recognized standards on transparency, accountability, and business integrity. Earlier this year, the OECD Council approved the OECD recommendation on public integrity, which provides policymakers with a blueprint for a public integrity strategy. It shifts the focus from ad hoc integrity policies to a comprehensive, risk-based approach with an emphasis on cultivating a culture of integrity across the whole of society. We're also providing targeted anti-corruption tools in key risk areas. The OECD recommendation of the Council on Public Procurement, for example, helps mitigate the risk of corruption in a sector that accounts for almost 30% of government expenditure in OECD members alone. So in some cases, it's an even larger share. So the public procurement part of the government expenditure, massively important, very, very big in terms of the overall proportion of total spending, and the area where, well, roughly about 2/3 of the cases of corruption have been identified in the work that we put out last year, about 429 cases of corruption. Now, of course, anti-corruption efforts benefit from our broader drive to reduce tax evasion and tax avoidance. G20 countries have already identified almost 80 billion euros in additional unplanned revenues through voluntary disclosure programs and other initiatives, because now all the countries feel it's inevitable, but mostly all the people who have the accounts feel that it's inevitable, that the taxman or taxwoman are going to get the information. They're going to invite them to have a cup of tea, huh? So they're saying, well, in the case that, maybe hypothetically somebody would have created an account and not declared it, what can we do? So 80 billion of revenues have already been received with different mechanisms, different countries, because now they feel this is for real. And it's another area where not only do we fight corruption, but we also give countries the wherewithal, not only to fight corruption, but also to just do general public programs. We also support the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group with data, with analysis. For example, the OECD helped develop the G20 high-level principles on financial disclosure, high-level principles on beneficial ownership and transparency. I'm trying to look here at a number of publications, which I'll show you in a minute. Then there's also the high-level principles on beneficial ownership, transparency, big issue, because beneficial ownership is not just about taxes. It's also about money that has been taken away. And you say, who owns the trust called the Black Horse? Well, the owner of the trust called the Black Horse is a trust called the White Horse, you know. And you just go there and all the horses of all the colors, you know, you never get to the person. You never get to the people. You never get to, so beneficial ownership, we're working with our colleagues in the Financial Action Task Force and with the different ministries of Treasury around the world in order to make as much progress as we can on the question of beneficial ownership. High-level principles on mutual legal assistance, the G20 guiding principles on integrity in public procurement, guiding principles on enforcement of the foreign bribery offense, and the G20 anti-corruption open data principles, to name just a few. Now, these are the broad principles, you know, the guidelines. But we're working directly with national governments also.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking the Secretary General and his team for the very kind invitation to join you at this very important forum, and also for the very warm welcome to my delegation. Thank you very much. I will be speaking for a few minutes on a topic: united action is the key. There's now hardly any credible opposition to the notion that corruption and illicit financial flows constitute perhaps the greatest challenge to development. And this is especially true of developing countries. Besides, we have seen how in Nigeria in recent years, how corruption has directly fueled the terrorist insurgency in northeast Nigeria, and how in turn this has led to one of the greatest humanitarian disasters in the world. 20,000 fatalities and 2 million displaced. Also the adverse implications for education, healthcare, social services, infrastructure, and indeed the quality of lives no longer require making a case. Indeed, there is a real sense in which corruption, especially grand corruption, should be regarded as a crime against humanity. Corruption and illicit financial flows are different, but they really must be twinned. This is because, for practical purposes, it's an eminently more sensible approach to treat most of the sources of illicit financial flows as corrupt activity within a broader use of the term. It's also clear that most economies ravaged by corruption, usually both as a cause and consequence, have institutions that are too weak to fight corruption and illicit financial flows. International collaboration is therefore the smartest and most effective approach to apprehend and deter perpetrators and ensure restitution of stolen assets. Already, much commendable work has been done in creating a robust international framework for tackling corruption and illicit financial flows. And the OECD has been a remarkably effective actor in these efforts. These initiatives include the Global Forum for Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes, the Multilateral Convention on Mutual Cooperation in Tax Matters, an OECD initiative, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Project, the sections 1502 and 1504 of the Dodd-Frank Act, US legislation, the Automatic Exchange of Information, an OECD, G20, and G8 initiative, the Anti-Bribery Convention, The public registry, the UK's public registry, United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force, the Open Government Partnership, and the United Nations Tax Committee initiatives. In West Africa, efforts at regional cooperation are underway. The draft ECOWAS Common Investment Code of 2013 provides that member states should conclude treaties to allow for exchange of information between the fiscal authorities of the various jurisdictions. The treaty would also provide for identifying tax havens and examining their taxable bases, rates, and fiscal administration through the establishment of a regional body in accordance with the ECOWAS revised treaty. Before I left Lagos yesterday, our cabinet ratified a treaty on ECOWAS tax administration, which would open the way for greater cooperation amongst West African states in the exchange of tax information. Internally, we established a 7-man Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption. We also established an Anti-Corruption and Criminal Justice Reform Fund with the support of 3 international development partners, Ford, MacArthur, and the Open Society West Africa. Our whistleblower initiative, launched barely 8 weeks ago, has achieved great success and praise both locally and internationally. We've also announced a tax amnesty program within the context of voluntary disclosure. We've signed several bilateral mutual legal assistance treaties on collaboration on financial crimes and corruption with numerous countries within and outside our region, the latest being with the United Arab Emirates, and this we ratified just this week. Of particular note on the continental level is the groundbreaking work of the Thabo Mbeki panel on illicit financial flows from Africa. The initiative, which was sponsored by a joint commission of the AU and the ECA, who were alarmed at the prospect that most African states, despite earnings and official development assistance, would not meet the Millennium Development Targets in 2015, noted that Africa loses at least $50 billion annually in illicit financial flows. The panel's far-reaching conclusions and recommendations again underscore the overwhelming importance of global collaboration, especially to bridge the huge capacity gap between the large corporations and organized crime identified as the foremost perpetrators and facilitators of corrupt activity in and also illicit flows from Africa. Yet more needs to be done. First, as rightly noted by the Thabo Mbeki Commission, the global architecture against corruption and illicit flows remains weak, incomplete, and complicated in many important respects. For many African countries, operationalizing some of these mechanisms may be expensive, cumbersome, and simply sometimes beyond their existing capacities. Second, developing countries are often left out in the crafting of important initiatives, as for example, the current conversations and measures being taken on the OECD's Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Project, BEPS, the components of which are of importance to economies of developing countries. The OECD's G20 and G8 anti-corruption and integrity initiatives should have developing countries at the table. The demand and supply sides of international corruption and illicit financial flows may be better served by this inclusive approach. Mr. Secretary General, we must work collaboratively to ensure transparency in financial transfers and outlaw secrecy jurisdictions. There must be more rigorous enforcement of the rules promoting transparency in the international banking and financial systems, especially more stringent KYC rules on customer identity, source of wealth, and even country of origin. Countries hosting global financial centers and other usually targeted destinations of illicit flows must be held more accountable to enforce mechanisms which ensure transparency of ownership, control, beneficial ownerships, trusts, and other legal contrivances that may be used to camouflage financial or other assets. Open contracting and information systems are also crucial. Responsible government authorities ought to have information about which companies won what contracts and what they've paid as taxes to governments in host and home countries. This is especially important for the extractive industry. Nigeria is committed to these standards, having joined the Open Government Partnership in 2016. The tracing, freezing, and return of stolen assets has proved in many cases to be exceptionally difficult for most African countries. We in Nigeria have seen just how difficult this is to get back stolen assets from the international financial system, banks that ought not to have received those funds in the first place, even if the most routine questions were asked. A robust global framework on repatriation of stolen assets, which ensures quick restitution to victim countries, is long overdue. Your Excellencies, there is a consensus that corruption and illicit financial flows out of Africa inexorably delay the attainment of development goals, worsen practically all human development indices, and trap the majority of her people, especially the most vulnerable, in a cycle of misery. Only united global action has the power to reverse this trend. And we respectfully urge that this power be exercised more vigorously and without further delay. Thank you very much.
Oh, I love this. Fun. Okay, wait. Colóquenlo.